Hey everybody, it's Funny once again. Hope you're doing well. Today we were rambling about the Make Noise Multimod. It is a 10HP CV audio coupled source of uncertainty with 8 outputs, and it sounds like this. Okay, before we get started here, just to put it into a bit of context quickly here, if you've been following the channel, you know I've been on the hunt for a clocked source of LFOs with lots of outputs, with lots of immediacy, easy to put your hands on, and with attenuation. Now, Multimod has all of those, but not the attenuation. Surprisingly, it's really immediate, it's really hands-on, it's really intuitive, and it's really easy to just get lots of patch points. I'm trying to eliminate all of the headaches, all of the menu diving, all of the groaning, all of the everything between me and my clocked modulation. I just want to use it everywhere, all the time. And the Multimod, surprisingly, because I sort of avoid Make Noise stuff sometimes, and sometimes it's great. I love my Spectrophone, I love the DPO, I love lots of stuff they've done, but when it comes to something like the Morphogene and other stuff, I'm kind of like leery about Make Noise stuff because I don't want it to be that way. I want it to be utilitarian and easy and straightforward, which the Multimod totally is. I love just like how easy it is to get 8 LFOs out of this thing so easily with just a tempo input. It's all on board, but we're also going to explore the other things you can do with it. So, all right, enough putting into context, let's put it into your ears. We're listening to a little patch with it. I only have 4 inputs on the data, so obviously I only scoped up 4 of them, but I tried to spread the I/O across the 8 as much as possible. Let's put this into the 6th. Just so you can see how they vary as much as possible. There's a little overlap on my scope. Sorry, I'm just filling it up as much as we can. So, with that being said, the first output of the first channel is going into the decay of the Ultra Kick. Let's listen to just that. And probably to the kick sound's detriment, to be totally honest, but that's okay. I just really want to demonstrate the modulation as like dramatically as possible, even if it sounds goofy for it, right? It almost sounds like a DJ riser. So in comes my synth voice. I'll take the kick out for a moment. And what we have on the second one, so we have a pure sine wave, and maybe I'll just back this out so you can see. Pure sine wave from the Mind Phaser. Hopefully you can see that. Coming into here, our second output is modulating the fold of this wave folder in the fold processor. Our third output in red on the scope here in the blue cable is going into the inject CV, so we're modulating the CV a little bit here as well. Nothing too crazy. But then in the last one, which I still need to patch up, and we're going to do right now, is going to be the filter cutoff of Excalibur. And we'll bring this back in here. So this patch, it actually is no VCA, totally droning, but you're getting some sort of pulsing by use of the fold and the inject, like some of our ramps are going to basically take it out of audio territory, make it so dull that you can't hear it, and then make it so buzzy that it sounds like it's got an envelope, but it's only the Multimod. All this is just to say that I want to demonstrate how varied you can just take. Your entire system can be driven with CV with this, and that's why I'm so excited about it. So let's bring it back in again. Here comes our drums. So yeah, it's really goofy, but I hope it can really demonstrate what's going on. Let's bring it back in here. So on the I/O here, we have an input in, and I'm gonna finish the video with that, so we'll come back to it. But so just know I'm using the internal LFOs here using the shape control, but you can send either audio or CV in here. You can forego the clock if you wanted to and just send it clock modulation that's pre-clocked, I guess, and just mangle it from there. But for the most part, and how I see myself using it 90% of the time, it's going to be with the internal LFOs. And when it comes to modulation, you can demonstrate it in any way, any use, you know. I don't need to be the one to tell you that, but just keep that in mind. Now it does also have a sample and hold thing going on here with the hold knob. So if I press it here, it's just going to basically freeze the outputs at where they were. But if you clock that, and I'll take a LFO on this side here to do that. This is unrelated to the multimod, but if we put that into LFO range, you'll see you can create stepped modulation, which is kind of funny because there is a stepped modulation mode in the LFOs as well, but you can make your own, right? This can replace your sample and hold circuits, which is really cool. But just keep in mind that the spread and all those things, it is just freezing it. It's not sending a global sample and hold. It can do more by that. Now, I'm not going to use that for too much in this video because, again, I just want to do that. But it is, you know, having a button, it's also a performance tool if you want, right? You can freeze it. So then on the left here we have phase, and if you push up your phase, it doesn't change the clock division or anything like that. It's basically just shifting the peaks between the LFOs. And I know it's kind of hard to see on this grid where our shapes aren't symmetrical, or they seem like they're all different, but they're not. But you can see that these peaks are all adjacent, right? The more we increase the phase knob, the more the spread shifts, right? If you looked at point to point as being like 180 degrees, well, the more phase shift we do there, the more they'll move around. And this will have applications in cool ways as well. When you're sending audio in, it kind of works like a delay. You can move the buffer around a little bit, kind of, if I'm even understanding it rightly, but we'll get to that in a moment. So for the most part, I like to use a little bit of phase because when you start to get into doing spread and all of that craziness stuff, the phase can really help make them unique from each other. And just to be jumping ahead a little bit here, you see the red LEDs above the bottom ones means that they're more phase shifted. So if we crank up the phase shift, you see everything becomes more red because it's more out of phase. And if we turn it down, it all becomes more white because it's more in phase. Just to give you a demonstration on that. The LEDs above these here are really nice because it gives you just like obviously I have it scoped up and I can see what's going on, but it gives you a rough idea of like, okay, what's going to be happening there. And when we're not using any spread, maybe it's a good time to get into the spread. When you increase the spread, it will change the clock shift between the different channels. So you'll see now our first channel is pitched up. Basically, if we're thinking it in LFO terms, the LFO is becoming closer and closer together. And then on the final channel, it is way spread out, right? And then what I like, so if I'm just looking at these, pretend I didn't have the data. If I'm just looking at these, I can see, okay, above the 7 is way slower LFO than above the 3, right? Which, I mean, I know I patched that. I turned the spread knob to do that, but it's just a useful indicator, right? And I also like the workflow of like, okay, I have this running. I have a whole bunch of modulation always at the ready. When I'm patching, I can just see, okay, I like the rate of that slow one. Let's do a really slow modulation of the drive on my filter, right? Which I just patched up. I think it's out of the screen, but it's just to say that like that workflow, that simplicity, and that quantity of modulation, I really, really appreciate because it's just so easy, right? Like, you know, I don't need the most complex waveforms. I don't need the most precise control. What I want to do is eliminate the headaches between me and modulating every input on my system, basically. So we just talked about spread. There is a attenuverter here for spread CV. And I will say modulating the spread is a great thing because you get like still clocked, but you can shift here. Let's use an external LFO for that. If I CV the spread, you can, I'll send a negative actually. You can basically shift it from being one side is really long and slow, and then you get like this sort of like macro movement of the modulation where one side starts really slow and then moves really fast. So if I put this in the middle and send it positive, you should see it move. Yeah, here comes the LFO. So you see we moved our fast LFOs, for lack of a better word, from the top to the bottom here, and then back, right, as we cycle back and forth. And I think that's really, really cool. Now, I will say when you do internal patching for that specific use case, it kind of feeds off onto itself, which is a little weird. You might want to use some external modulation for that one, basically because the speed is speeding itself up. It seems like it just like kicks itself into the upper territory. So when it comes to that use, which I do love, do modulate it from elsewhere, I'd say. Another bizarre thing on here, which really isn't a big deal at all, but I think it's kind of funny. This time knob is a little backwards in my mind. So the more you slow down the time, the faster it goes, like it's less divided, I guess. So my clock divisions are down because I'm clocking it externally. But if I turn it up, it goes slower. So I guess it's more divided, right? And when you aren't externally clocking it, if you're using the internal clock here, the same thing happens though, where the slower the time is, the faster it goes. So when I increase the time, I'm like bringing the BPM up, right? It's the opposite, which is totally fine. It's just a little thing you got to get used to. That being said, if you are internally clocking it, or I guess if you are externally too, when you are internally clocking it, you get this clock output, which is really interesting. I like that because you could make this the brains of your whole system, right? I'm going to make another comparison to PAMs in that way, that like, if you hate menus and screens, and I love screens, this could be your master clock and a whole wackitude of modulation for a small case, right? It's 10 HP and there's a clock output on here. Why not do everything, right? But yeah, you do get a clock output on there. Again, like I said, I really am here for the clock modulation. I love it. I am here for it. But one other thing that you get that is really interesting, we're going to put this into the second input on here. So you get this output, which is actually really interesting because it ends up being a 9th output of modulation. You get this sort of stepped random output that is caused by it outputs whatever channel is highest. So if everything's in phase and everything's at the same time, I think this will actually follow all of them the same, unless it's like sample and holding in some way, which it does kind of seem like. But it just outputs random step voltages basically based on whichever LFO is, or whichever output is highest at that time. It'll just sample it. And it must be stepped, right? You see step modulation, so it must be just like clocking to that the same way. And I think that's rad because you get a, 9th output of modulation out of this tiny thing. Like you would basically have nearly one output per HP in 10 HP. I think that's wicked. And so, yeah, you have a sample and hold circuit on there. You have a random output as well if you want to do both. And then on top of all that, and I've sort of intentionally done this all backwards because most demonstrations would probably be looking at the shape. But I think the shapes for me in the context of just using LFOs, it's not super important, but I wanted to make a distinction on the front of the random LFO because there is a random LFO or a stepped modulation mode on here. Let's get into here in order. So starting off with the first mode in the shape mode, this is also applied to external sources when you bring them in, which I'm kind of confused about, where if you send a modulation source in, so I send a triangle wave in and I'm in ramp wave mode, do I get a triangle wave out? Yes, I do. So in what context does that change? Well, in the manual, it says that the red mode is a ramp mode, which you see when I'm not using any input. But in the sending input mode, I'm thinking, it says forward read. So I guess if you're using audio, it would make it go forward, I'm guessing. I don't know. If we switch over to the green mode, this is the saw mode. As you see, it calls it the backwards read. I think you would get some like enveloping maybe of like coming back. We'll have to test that out in the next part. Then in this blue mode that I think is purple, but they call it a forward read, a ping pong read, which is here, I'm going to scope this back into the third output, not that random-esque output. That is the triangle wave or the ping pong read they describe it. I'm assuming that's for processing other stuff. In the purple mode is the sine wave. They call it the wow and flutter. So I guess you could probably do some tape effects over audio at the input if you brought this up to audio rate. It's really interesting. There's like an amount of depth to that audio section that we are not going to touch at all, but we're going to try. So now we're in the pink mode. This is the square/staircase. So you basically get pulses, and this is a cool clock divider if you wanted to use it as that too, right? Like, there's just like, I trying to think of, like, outside of slew, I don't really know what modulation things this can't do. So what I wanted to circle back to here, though, is that you can create your own modulation by sample and holding that input, but there is also a step random mode on the orange. So you could also sample and hold the step random as well, right? But like I was saying, there's like no shortage of things on here. And the nice thing about the workflow too, though, is you don't have to know what all of those means. You don't have to know, you don't have to have the scope hooked up. You don't have to know what step modulation is. You can kind of look at the LEDs as they're indicated and say, those are kind of like blipping a little too much. I want to do something that's kind of more envelope-y. Now this last mode is not envelope-y. This is the ramplets, so it's similar to step random, but a new location is selected per channel. However, once the location is selected, playback will continue forward until the next clock. Again, it's sort of, at least in this patch, ends up looking like a different ramp wave, but it does seem to have a little bit of slew. And if you look at the top one, there's like more noise territory. It doesn't seem like stepped random so much. Where I am probably going to live 90% of the time, though, for me, is in the blue ping pong mode in the triangle wave, which is great. I'm super excited about this. Super fresh, super easy to get my hands on. Let's listen to it again. If I increase the spread knob and the phase, we can get some more motion to this patch because things are moving faster in the first two channels than in the bottom two. But then if we want to like add even more motion, like I said, we're going to take that LFO again and increase the spread. And I better move my spread knob down. And yeah, the patch is suffering a little bit because I'm trying to demonstrate the modulation more than good taste in music. But like, I don't know, this is the fun stuff for me. Moving it from negative into the positive. There we go. And this is probably where I might actually want to use like a Zeta or something to ping this into territory where it's super long envelope, can push one side of the multimod into the other. And you'll probably say to me too that there's an algorithm somewhere that might be good for internally patching, but when I just take the fifth output and put it in the spread here, we do kind of get weird spots where it gets stuck in certain places, like right now. Because it's modulating itself, right? If the rate's increasing when it's in the same zone, it's kind of like sticking to one side. I want to just use an external source to modulate the whole thing at a macro level. Now, with all of that being said, the last thing I want to do here is try sending some audio into it because nearly every video demo I watched on it made use of that, and I've yet to check it out in preparation for this, so I thought it'd be fun to check it out together, and maybe that can be what plays us out. So I'm going to take a whole bunch of outputs here directly out, bypassing the scope, and run them straight into a mixer, so goodbye to a bunch of those. But I just want to spread them as much as we can across these so we can listen to them. We'll take the 8th one out here, and then we'll stop playing our drums, and we'll just listen to our output here out of curiosity, cranking all these things up so you can see, and then we are going to scope the output here. In comes that one. Output from my mixer that has all of these different inputs into one, and then I don't know, we're just going to start out with a triangle wave that's super straightforward. Here comes audio in. So we're listening to 4 different outputs mixed down. There's no filter, there's no nothing. Let's move this down. And we're getting sort of a bit crushing sort of thing, but if we bring up the speed, you get sort of wacky delay. If we bring it up, we get less bit reduction, bit crushing. And if we do, so less phase and less spread, they all should basically be the same. We get sort of like delay, right? But if we do phase shifting and spread, you get intervals, sort of like a clock divider. What happens if we switch modes? We get different timbres. If we hold, Interesting, the hold doesn't seem to change here. Less phase. If we take my tempo out, so I'm not clocking it anymore. It does have sort of a dull timbre to it, though. It sounds like almost lo-fi. Like I feel like it's being filtered a little bit. Oh. So what happens if I CV modulate it? I know people are super interested about this. I'm just curious to check it out. If I put an LFO from another source into, I don't know, the spread. You want a wacky delay, you got one. Let's send a saw into, I don't know, the time. If we send audio rate. Spread down. In goes our spread CV. Wild. Let's switch algorithms now that we're doing this. Hell yeah. Purple. Okay. So it's definitely not trying to convert it into that waveform like a, I don't know, like a resynthesis engine. It's just sort of like sample and holding the whole thing, right? In like a macro way or micro way. Whoa. If I clock its own resets? No, that's a dumb idea. What if we CV modulate the phase? This sort of crap probably sells modules, but I don't know what is going on. What happens if I send the piston Honda in and not a triangle wave? So it's going to get really rowdy. The only thing is like I'd almost want another modulation source to control it with, but it's a little busy right now. What happens if I patch in more inputs? Phase in. Yeah. I love it. All right. Having too much fun. I'm Tafony. Thank you so much for watching Multimod. The esoterica wall that I expected it to be, it's totally not. It is a super hands-on and immediate modulation source that can clock 8 outputs, and I love that. Well, 9 if you count that one. So, hey, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that crap that YouTube's always on my case but not promoting to you. And I'll see you in the next video.